ADJ 140, Introduction to Corrections, Chapter 3, Sentencing, to Punish or to Reform. Your text defines sentencing as imposition of a criminal sanction by a sentencing authority. Sentence, penalty a court imposes on a person convicted of a crime. Social order, smooth functioning of social institutions, positive and productive relations among individual members of society, and orderly functioning of society as a whole. It's important to discuss the goals of sentencing. Revenge is obviously one goal. Punishment as vengeance, emotional response to real or imagined injury or insult. Retribution is an important term. Retaliation against a criminal perpetrator. Belief that victims are entitled to reprisal. Another goal of sentencing could be just deserts. Punishment deserved. Criminal offenders are morally blameworthy and are hence deserving of punishment. Just deserts would embrace the concept of an eye for an eye. If you do the crime, then you must do the time. Deterrence, discouraging or prevention of crimes through the fear of punishment. The different types of deterrence is specific deterrence and also general deterrence. It's important that you know the difference, that specific deterrence is deterrence of the individual being punished from committing additional crimes. And general deterrence is the use of examples of individual punishment to dissuade others from committing crimes. So a good example of that would be when a police officer stops someone for speeding. The specific deterrence is being carried about on the person that they stopped, and they're going to be punished through a fine. But while this police officer has this person stopped on the side of the road, if 40 or 50 other vehicles go by and see that person pulled over, it could cause them to slow down a bit too, to remind them that someone else is being punished and we can all see it. So it also could incentivize others to slow down as well. The pleasure-pain principle, idea that actions are motivated primarily by a desire to experience pleasure and avoid pain. Another goal of sentencing could be incapacitation, the use of imprisonment or other means to reduce an offender's capability to commit future offenses. If we take a violent offender off the street and put them in prison, it's very difficult to measure how many crimes they would have committed, but we can be sure that while they are within those prison cells, they're not going to be preying upon society. So that's incapacitation, so removing that offender from the place that they could offend. 3 strikes laws. They impose mandatory prison sentences, generally a life sentence on those convicted of an offense, if they have been previously convicted of 2 prior serious criminal offenses. We saw a rise in 3 strikes laws in the 1990s, and we saw a sharp incline or increase of the prison population in the United States. Goals of sentencing, truth in sentencing. The sentencing principle that requires an offender to serve a substantial portion of the sentence and reduces the discrepancy between the sentence imposed and actual time spent in prison. Rehabilitation, changing of criminal lifestyles into law-abiding ones, involves correction of behavior through treatment, education, and training. The goal of rehabilitation would be to produce someone who is a taxpayer, who is contributing to society outside of the prison. So rather than just have someone sit in a cell, which would be more of a retribution sort of goal, a rehabilitation would be, look, this person is going to be released at some point in the future, and we need them to come out of prison and want to be a productive member of society. Which is also called reintegration, a process of making the offender productive. Restoration, a relatively new concept in the United States, but not necessarily in other countries. One country that specifically embraces restoration would be Japan. Restoration is defined as a process of returning to their previous condition all of those involved in or affected by crime. So restoration, while it's fairly new in America, not necessarily all over the world, and that would be that we want to include the victims within the sentencing, to allow them to speak, to allow them to be heard, to allow them to accept an apology if the offender is willing to give one, which is very common within the country of Japan, that you would see much lighter sentences if the victim's family is able to receive an apology. This goes along with restorative justice, a systematic response to wrongdoing that emphasizes healing and the wounds of the victim, offenders, and communities caused by or revealed by the crime. Victim impact statement, description of the suffering that a crime has caused the victims. So once the United States began to have an adversarial court system, most criminal cases were viewed as the state versus the criminal, or the United States versus the criminal. And we've pretty well historically pushed the victim to the side. That's beginning to change, that we're allowing more victims to have input within the trials and sentencing. The judge has many sentencing options, one being probation, which is typically an alternative to imprisonment. Intermediate sanctions. This could be a halfway house. This could be community service. This could be something that doesn't necessarily put someone in prison, or within 100% physical custody, but they're still going to end up experiencing some sanctions. Jail and prison obviously is a sentencing option. Jails are typically ran on a local level for up to a year. Usually if you're sentenced to a felony for more than a year, you're going to end up in a state-run prison or a federal prison. Parole is early release from prison. Some states allow for parole, some do not. And then, of course, another sentencing option is capital punishment. That would be the execution or the death penalty. Different types of sentences. Mandatory sentences. Sentences required by law under certain circumstances. Many legislative bodies have taken it out of the judge's hands by saying that if you commit a certain crime, then society or that state or that municipality is going to require a judge to give you a minimum sentence for that certain crime. Know the difference between a consecutive and a concurrent sentence. Consecutive are sentences that are served one after another and imposed when a person is convicted of multiple offenses, and sentences served together. So typically, if a maximum sentence would be 3 years for a certain crime, and someone is found guilty of 3 counts of that, if they're serving consecutive sentence, they technically could serve 9 years. They would serve 3 years for the first crime, 3 for the next, and then 3 for the last one. If the judge gives them concurrent sentences, then they are permitted to serve all 3 at the same time, meaning they would only spend 3 years. And that's 3 concurrent sentences that they're serving at the exact same time. Types of sentences. Flat sentences specify an amount of time to be served in custody and do not allow variation from the time specified. Indeterminate sentences. Judge specifies a maximum and a minimum length of time, and generally a parole board determines the actual time of release. Some of that could be based upon good time, where offenders are released early if they behave themselves in jail or in prison. A determinate sentencing, however, sentence of a fixed term of incarceration can be reduced by good time, and good time is defined as amount of time prison authorities deduct from the sentence for good behavior and for other reasons. Presumptive sentence is an expected sentence. Judges are expected to follow unless they document reasons for departing from the guidelines. In the United States, there are also sentencing commissions. It creates a schedule of sentences that reflect the gravity of the offense committed and the prior record of the offender. Be able to define what capital punishment is. That's the lawful imposition of the death penalty. It was once common throughout the world and has changed very recently, began changing in the 18th century during the Enlightenment. The United States is one of the few Western countries that continue to impose the death penalty upon its convicted criminals. Exhibit 3.4, State-Ordered Criminal Executions Worldwide in 2017. You can see that most of the countries are located in the Middle East, parts of Africa, and Asia. However, in the Western Hemisphere, the United States is an outlier. If you're wondering if your state participates in executions, Exhibit 3.5 lists the jurisdictions with and without capital punishment. Characteristics of prisoners under sentence of death as of January 1st of 2019. As far as gender and sex, you can see that it's mostly males at 98%. Blacks and whites are pretty much the same. Education, 42% are high school graduates, and 55% have never been married. Methods of execution. Lethal injection, which has been the most popular method of execution in recent years. Electrocution, lethal gas, hanging, and firing squad. There are plenty of arguments for and against the death penalty. Many colleges and universities offer multiple full 3-credit-hour courses just studying the death penalty. You will discuss death penalty in ethics classes and philosophy classes. Everyone has an opinion regarding whether the death penalty is effective. The pros: deters people from committing crime. That's obvious. If they're executed, they're not going to be able to, on a specific level, to commit a crime again. Just punishment for murder, constitutionally appropriate, reduces time spent on death rows, thereby reducing costs, protects society, more humane than life imprisonment, almost impossible for an innocent person to be executed. But if you look at that, the key word there is almost impossible. The cons: does not deter crime. There's not a lot of evidence that we obviously have been executing people for hundreds of years, yet we continue to see violent crime. It violates human rights, falls disproportionately on racial minorities, costs too much, boosts the murder rate, known as the brutalizing effect. Not everyone wants vengeance, and it's arbitrary and unfair. You can see in Exhibit 3.8 the capital criminal process, trial through state and federal post-convictions. You see Stage 1 is trial and direct review if someone is sentenced to death, and Stage 2 would be state post-conviction appeals, and then Stage 3 would be federal habeas corpus appeals. This sometimes can take years, even up to a decade, while the person sits on death row. Your text mentions banning the execution of people with mental retardation and also juveniles, unconstitutional and in violation of the 8th Amendment. Reason for being banned is that it reflects evolving standards of decency that mark the progress of a maturing society. Adolescents lack mature judgment and are less aware of the consequences, are more vulnerable than adults to peer pressure, and are more impulsive. And finally, we can discuss reducing prison populations and costs. Types of reforms that have been implemented by states and federal government to reduce prison populations and cost are as follows. Sentencing modifications, to examine whether or not we have high sentences when we really shouldn't for minor crimes. Probation and parole revocation reforms. Changes in the criminal law. Using jails instead of prison, which are on the local level. Early release, especially for good behavior, as well as juvenile sentencing reforms.